Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
It's an interesting conversation we can finally have about immigration. This has been that topic that's been discussed for a while, but not settled. 20 years this body has talked about solving some of the immigration issues. National security and immigration hasn't been a partisan issue until of late. And suddenly when President Trump brings it up, we've got a bunch of folks that used to be for border security that are now against border security because President Trump wants to do border security. With some of the exact same ideas that have been the Gang of Eight bill or that were in previous versions or were even talked about with a secure wall or fence before. Almost every Democrat in this body voted for the Secure Fence Act of 2006. It's interesting to me the number of people that contact us saying we do not want to build a wall. And I've said, what about the 650 miles of wall that already exist that were put in place after 2006? That, by the way, President Obama, when he was then Senator Obama, wholeheartedly supported and voted for. This is now suddenly a partisan issue. I'm trying to help our entire body take a step back and to say immigration should be a humanity issue and a legal issue, not a political issue. I had a conversation with a friend of mine this weekend, who he and I have known each other for years. He's a pastor. And we started talking about the immigration issue. And in that dialogue, he said to me, in the church, we look at every individual as an individual that's creating the image of God, and that the church has a ministry to be able to reach out to regardless of their legal status. But then he said right behind it, but in government, we understand there's a different responsibility. The church engages with every person equally, but the government has the responsibility of being able to look at laws, what is legal and what is not legal, and helping abide by those laws and enforcing those laws. He's correct. There is an issue of humanity that's in this. These are people that are caught in a system, and oftentimes those children in the DACA program that are caught in between the gap here, that literally they have no home country because they were brought as infants or as young children with a parent that violated the law, but with a child that came in and now live in a country sometimes 20 years that they only know this country. They're literally caught in the middle. And while we have great compassion, we're walking this interesting balance between compassion for people, which we as a nation have, and also consistently with the law, that the law applies to every person, whether you're the President of the United States or an undocumented individual that's come in. The law applies to everyone. So what do we do in this? Well, the first thing I think we need to do is take a deep breath and to pull the politics out of this and to say border security, in fact, security as a whole is not a controversial issue. I would tell you as a United States Senator, I have the privilege occasionally of going to do interviews. Let me just give you an example. CNN has a great studio here in Washington, D.C. And when you go to the studio in Washington, D.C., you'll go through the front door of the big building and there'll be a security person that's there and they'll check your ID before you go any farther. And not only will they check your ID, they'll make sure that you're already pre-registered to be there to visit with CNN, because you just can't walk in. You have to notify them ahead of time that you're coming, even if you're the person being interviewed. Then there's a physical barrier between you and the elevators. And once the security guard clears you, you go through the physical barriers, but you can't go up the elevator because the security guard has to clear you to actually go up that elevator and punch in a certain code to go up to the floor. And when you arrive at that floor, you're literally in nowhere land, because everywhere around you is locked doors until someone comes in and clears you. Then you go to another security guard and you sign in at that security guard, again check ID, and then you have an escort that takes you into the studio. That escort stays with you because as soon as your interview is done, they'll smile at you and say, your time is up, we're going to escort you out. Now, it's a shame that CNN has to do that, but they do. Because not everybody that walks through their doors means to do them help. There are some people that mean to do them harm, and it is right for them to keep that level of security. But for that level of security that we talk about for CNN, all of us see that as a rational thing. Unfortunate, but rational. I would say to us as a nation, why is that rational at CNN headquarters, and it's irrational for us to be able to do the same thing with our own borders? Not everyone that means to cross our border is there to help us. We can all admit there are some individuals, a few, thankfully, but there are some individuals that do mean to cross our borders and do us harm. We should be aware of that. We have 500,000 people a day that legally cross our border, our southern border alone. 500,000 people a day that cross back and forth, that legally go through the system, that are doing commerce, that are visiting family. There's all kinds of individuals that move back and forth through our gates legally every single day. We should ask a question, why are 500,000 people moving through legally, but yet there are thousands and thousands that are moving through illegally? What's the difference? And should we ask questions of some of those? Should there be a physical barrier in some spots? We've seen some places like in Yuma, Arizona, when there wasn't a physical barrier and there's a large city right on the border, that there was crime that would cross the border quickly, commit a crime, and move right back across the border. When a physical barrier was put in place now a decade ago at Yuma, Arizona, the crime rate dropped dramatically in that area. A physical barrier helped and did reduce. And while I've had people say, if you build a 30-foot wall, there'll be a 31-foot ladder leaning against it. I said, that's true. But it slows them down in giving enough time in remote areas or in heavily urbanized areas for people to be able to respond and to be able to actually interdict those individuals. Walls don't stop people. They slow people down so you can actually do interdiction and say, why are you going over the wall rather than through the gates like 500,000 other people are doing today? Why is that happening? That's not unreasonable, but it's become heavily politicized. We need to step back and to remove this from a conversation about presidents and about political parties and move it back to some basic common sense things that this Congress used to do on wide bipartisan support. Things like a physical barrier. There should be a wall in certain areas of the southern border that don't have a wall right now. There should be areas of technology in other areas. There should be an area to have watchtowers with cameras that are there. We should add some additional personnel. We're talking about 3,000 plus miles on our northern border, 2,000 miles on our southern border. It's a lot of territory to be able to cover. Some of those areas, they don't even have broadband access to it, and so just getting information to the agents that work there takes a very long time or is unreliable. We do need to have some technology improvements in some of those areas. Should every part of our border have a wall? No, I don't think so. It shouldn't all have a wall. But in areas where it's in heavily populated areas, it probably should, because that provides greater security, quite frankly, on both sides of the border. Some of it's even more simple than that. There are areas where there's large amounts of cane that are growing up in the Rio Grande River, and the Border Patrol agents can't see on both sides of the river who's moving through because people can hide in the cane. Just eradicating the cane that is all through that area in the border, in the river area, would provide tremendous visibility. That would allow people to be able to see farther and would, quite frankly, stop some of the drug interdiction and stop some of the drug movement and allow for more interdiction in those areas. It shouldn't be that controversial. That should be common sense. Adding technology, adding sensors, adding greater visibility, adding areas of wall that needs a wall and other areas that don't, we don't. But that's not just the issue. Some of the issue is fixing loopholes in the law that get exploited. There's some individuals that cross the border and then they know the rules. The coyotes in Central America that are actually human smuggling them all the way through Mexico and getting to the border have told them exactly what to say. So when they encounter a Border Patrol agent, they say these words and you'll get access to asylum, whether they're true or not. But what typically starts is they say those words that the coyotes have told them to say, and they actually get a quick hearing and what's called a notice to appear for another hearing, usually 2 or 2.5 years later, and they disappear somewhere into the American system, and we have no idea where they are. They're somewhere among 300 plus million Americans in some town, in some place, and we don't know. The vast majority of them never show up for their court hearings, but they have a piece of paper that says notice to appear, which also means they're given legal protections until that court date, and they can move around the country. That's a loophole in our system. It should be fixed. Nowhere else would do that. Why do we do that? We allow ourselves to be exploited. There's some words and phrases that we just need to be able to clean up in the law. And some things that need to be done. Again, that shouldn't be controversial. That should be security related. That should be some basic questions about how we're going to handle immigration. We allow 1 million people a year to become citizens of the United States legally. 1 million people a year. And yet the American system is also ignoring hundreds of thousands of others that are coming into the system illegally and pretending it's not happening. It is. And for 20 years, this Congress has not paid attention to it. Now, say what you would like to about President Trump, but he is pushing this Congress to do something it's not done in 2 decades. Deal with the issue of border security. This body will have to come to agreement on that. The House of Representatives will have to come to agreement on that, and the President will have to be able to sign it, or it'll be just another executive action that won't last very long. But if we're going to have lasting, real change in border security, it has to go through the legislative process. The President is pushing us to get that done before the first week of March. We had 6 months of time, 4 months of that have already run out. It is time to get that document finished, to deal with the basic things that the President has asked. Border security, a legal status for those individuals that are in the DACA program that the previous president just put on a deferral sense that we won't arrest you, but they're in some sort of legal limbo in between. President Trump wants to actually have a permanent answer for all of those families. Dealing with things on border security, not just the wall, but the other exceptions into it. The president wants to deal with the visa lottery, which is a system where 50,000 people somewhere in the world are just randomly drawn out of a hat to be able to become American citizens. Many of us have said for a long time, that's a foolish way to do your immigration system. Our immigration system should be based on what do we need in America, what jobs, what locations, rather than just a random pull out of a hat of people around the world. Understanding that there are millions and millions and millions of people around the world that would love to be Americans. But in America, we want to be able to target those individuals that want to not just be Americans, but want to be a part of us, not just culturally, but economically, to be a fabric of who we are, to be able to make decisions for ourselves as a nation, and to be able to do it not just in our own policy, but also in our immigration policy. That's not too much to ask. There are basic things that should be done. Dealing with the DACA students that are literally caught in a place where they have no home is a compassionate thing to do. But along with our compassion, we need to also uphold the law. Those kids should not be held to account for what their parents did. But their parents should not have the same access to the American system of being naturalized as the kids do, only because the parents did intentionally violate the law. They chose to break the law and bring their child with them when they did it. The child didn't make that decision. Now they're growing up in a place where they have no country. They should have a shot to be able to be in our nation. I do not believe that the parents of those kids that broke the law should have that same access to our system. Now, that may seem heartless, but I would tell you that's the balance we have to have between compassion for people and upholding the law, that the law does apply to all people. Maybe there's a way to do some other work permits or some other things that could be there. But access to citizenship should be reserved to those individuals that are upholding the law, not violating it. Here's some DACA kids that have done some pretty remarkable stuff. Some DACA kids that are some pretty amazing individuals. I tell folks in Oklahoma when I'm home, if I could identify for you 700,000 people somewhere around the world that spoke English, that are excellent students, that stood up every day in their school and pledged allegiance to the United States of America, that are in our military already, that are already working in our economy right now, are those the individuals that you want to reach out to and be part of that 1 million people a year that become citizens? I've yet to have someone tell me, no, that's not who we're looking for. Everyone says, that's exactly who we're looking for. And I get to smile at them and say, they're already here. They just happen to have grown up in this country already, but they really have no home, and they'd love to call this one their home. I'd like to give them the opportunity to be able to earn the ability to be naturalized, not automatic, to be able to earn it, and to be able to go through the process, to be able to get in line like every other person around the world, to be able to get in line, but not have to return to their home country because they don't know a home country, but to be able to get in line here to be able to do it. There's a way to be able to do this. The president's been the first advocate for that. There's a way to be able to actually answer the problems that we've dealt with for 20 years on border security so that we don't continue to have another DACA program in 5 years, in 10 years, and over and over and over again as we're on right now. Let's solve it. Interestingly enough, in 2012, when President Obama announced the DACA program, he made some pretty blunt, clear statements during that time period. One of them was for individuals, this was in June of 2012, that are already here, and he set a date. He said, for those individuals, our nation wants to provide them an opportunity to not be arrested, and we'll work on your status. But for any future individuals that cross our border, you would not have access to this program. That's President Obama that made that statement in 2012. And while I've heard individuals say that we should abide by the words of our presidents, that when President Obama made those statements to those kids in 2012, I would remind us as a nation, we should honor all of those statements if we do any of those statements, including President Obama's statements of saying this will end and people that are crossing our border will be returned to their home country. As he announced publicly, there is a right way to be able to do immigration. Let's do it the right way. We already receive 1 million a year. Let's do it the right way. And you'll find a very welcoming United States of America. It's where I think we can go. And I hope in the days ahead that we can finish out a negotiation to be able to resolve some basic things. Not everything in immigration, but at least the core issues of immigration and border security. So we can resolve the issue not only for those kids in DACA, but continue to be able to work on how are we securing our nation for the future. With that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.